Welcome to class. This is Introduction to Political Ideas. I'm Ken Hicks, and we are concluding our discussion of fascism today. We're going to discuss a number of different more contemporaneous manifestations of fascism, which is going to bring us into some relatively controversial areas. I hope everyone will be prepared to listen with an open mind. We're going to talk a little bit about fascism other than in Germany and Italy. We're going to talk about fascism today. In particular, we're also going to talk about fascism in America, sort of the history of authoritarianism and kind of right-wing, race-based authoritarianism. We'll talk about the alt-right, and then we'll conclude our discussion of fascism as an ideology. So, while we think about fascism as mainly being an Italian and German 20th century phenomenon, there are a number of movements that fit at least some or most of the criterion for what we mean by fascism that has occurred in other countries. So fascist parties and fascist movements have proliferated across Europe in the 1920s and 30s. You actually had an effective, the Holocaust also took place in the Balkans. The Croatian Ustasi organization played a role in pursuing genocide against Jewish, Serb, and Roma populations. The Ustasi was a sort of a blend of fascism, Roman Catholicism, and Croatian hyper-nationalism. It's interesting, there's a candidate actually running for Senate in Maine who, when he was in the military in the city of Split, which is in Croatia, had a few drinks and with his army buddies went and got a tattoo. And he picked a mean-looking skull and crossbones kind of design, not realizing that it was a symbol of Croatian, fascism. And it's important to keep in mind that Croatians as an ethnic group in the Balkans had a very close relationship with Austria-Hungary in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and so they were again, on sort of the sympathetic side of the Croatian people ethnically to what was happening with kind of pan-German, ultimately fascistic movements. So that's one illustration of that. You also have Hungary's Arrow Cross Party. Again, it's blended elements of Nazism with Hungarian tyrannism. And keep in mind, again, as Hungary's role as sort of a co-partner in the last century or so of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Tyrannism is basically the mythologized belief in Hungarian exceptionalism and was again a reaction to the emergence of pan-German and pan-Slavic movements. Peoples that wanted a nation, wanted their national aspirations embodied in a state, so a nation state, if you will. In the span of roughly 6 months, the Arrow Cross Party killed 10 to 15,000 non-combatants and shipped 80,000 people to Austrian concentration camps, where, of course, many of them died. Spain, again, had a very long experience with authoritarian rule. The question is, whether Phalangism under Francisco Franco was a full-on fascist kind of ideology, whether the Falange Party was a fascist party, or whether it was a more garden variety, kind of conservative, nationalist, authoritarian regime. Franco and the Falange Party came to power with overt Italian and German military support. It's important to keep in mind, again, Germany and Italy probably put their thumb on the scale of the Spanish Civil War far more heavily than other countries. A lot of other countries simply kind of sat by, and while many Americans and Brits came individually to fight on the side of the Republican forces, the Germans really provided material. The Germans and the Italians provided material support. However, as you get into the later 1930s and into the 1940s, Franco effectively purged Falange of some of the more fanatical fascistic elements. And his kind of regime evolved into far more of just a sort of reactionary, religious conservative dictatorship that was intent on holding on to, holding a very fractious society intact. If you're not aware, Spanish politics is riven with nationalist and secessionist movement, kind of a revanchism. Both the Catalonians on the east coast of Spain and the Basques in the northwestern region of Spain have desired at various times to separate. And in fact, it was a Basque terrorist group that actually successfully assassinated Francisco Franco's designated successor, a guy named was a Spanish admiral. His last name was Blanco, and they were able to successfully blow him up. Franco was kind of on his deathbed at the time. The Falange Party was thrown into disarray, and the King of Spain simply called for democratic elections. It was one of these instances, one of these rare instances, frankly, where an act of terrorism or an act of violence certainly resulted in democratization, and it was very rapid. But Spain to this day has these kinds of kind of nationalist, separatist kind of pulls that they're still dealing with. Argentina had a prolonged period of what we might call Peronism. Juan Perón was an Argentinian military officer who played a role in the military coup of 1946 and effectively ruled the country until he was overthrown in 1955. A lot of people characterized Peronism as sort of an Argentinian application of Italian fascism. And so fascism in Italy was predominantly a middle class phenomenon, where Peronism was really a populist movement that mobilized working class Argentinians. And so another important distinction, like Francoism, Peronism really was not kind of oriented towards wars of territorial conquest, which most people would say is a critical element of fascism. That however effectively you want to do it, that's part of the ingredient, that not only do you want to rule the country that you control fascistically, but a genuinely fascist dictatorship would want to also conquer other territories. Another similar case is apartheid South Africa. This was the result of, began in 1948, when the Afrikaner Nationalist Party won control of government. If you look at the slide, the picture on this slide is Hendrik Verwoerd, who was he was actually Dutch. He was actually born in the Netherlands, who served as Prime Minister of South Africa from 1958 until his assassination in 1966. In 1948, the Boer, the Dutch Boer people, or ethnically Dutch people that settled in South Africa, adopted an official policy of apartheid, or government-enforced segregation. Verwoerd was commonly viewed as one of the principal architects of apartheid through his role both as Minister of Internal Affairs in the late 1940s and into the 1950s. And again, during World War II, he actually opposed South Africa's declaration of war. It's important to keep in mind that while more than half of the South African population is black, I want to say it's over 60%. There was a very large English colonial position, holdover, where there were lots of South Africans who were British, or from of Anglo descent, and then there was a significant Dutch presence as well, and so. There is a tendency among the Boers, if you will, to view themselves as God's chosen people, and that led them to say that we must be kept apart from the black population. There was definitely a racial component, and they had sort of apartheid had sort of a three-tiered kind of system of how they judged race, and they forced many, most of the black South Africans onto reservations and into little mini states like Lesotho, and they systematically discriminated against them as well. And again, the question arises, was this fascism? It was certainly authoritarianism. It was certainly oppressive for blacks. It was certainly violent towards blacks. They were not shy about enforcing the discrimination codes that they were imposing. And there were instances where the Afrikaner government certainly helped to prop up the apartheid government in Rhodesia as well. Where a similar kind of system was set up, and they also intervened occasionally in other countries nearby, when their policies were somehow threatening to South Africa. Nevertheless, you don't see that much evidence of the kind of ideology that's going to cause systematically, again, a war of territorial aggression. So again, the authoritarianism is there, the racism is there, but there's some critical elements that might be missing in what we're looking at as far as South Africa under apartheid. It was bad enough as it was. It was definitely an authoritarian government. Whether it was a fascist government or not, it's more of a gray area. There are also questions of whether fascism is emerging in India. In India, of course, you have a long history of communal violence, where, again, you have a Muslim community of, tens of millions, frankly, within a population of over 1 billion, the overwhelming majority of whom are Hindus. And you get the rise of Hindu nationalism in the 1920s in the form of Hindutva, and it's not, nobody should be shocked that many Indian nationalists were fascinated by and attracted to European fascism of that era. And this has influenced the politics of Bharatiya Janata's party, the BJP, which again is making a demand for a homogeneous Hindu cultural hegemony. And you have seen in this period the resurgence of Hindutva-based communal violence. And again, if you look at the picture, this is Narendra Modi, who is the Prime Minister of India, and he has governed India for some time now. I think he's been reelected twice now, so it's been more than 10 years that he's been in power. He was the governor, I want to say Gujarat, I don't have that on the tip of my tongue, I don't have it in my notes, but I believe he was, where there were numerous instances of really horrible communal violence where thousands of Muslims were killed as a result of nationalist-based rioting. So is Hindutva kind of a fascist ideology, or is it merely an extreme form of ethno-nationalism? I would say right now that it's more of an authoritarian, kind of an authoritarian-oriented nationalism. They're still having elections, so you can't really say that it's genuinely authoritarian. They haven't set aside elections to date. But then they also, since Modi has taken over, they haven't really lost an election. And there are elections coming up, and they have had some difficulties going forward due to, again, a long period of governance. The Indian National Congress, which is the other major party in India, is beginning to get better organized. But to this point, Hindu nationalism has strongly appealed to Indian Hindus, and that is something definitely that bears watching. So fascism today, there's growing. I think it's not, it's not an exaggeration to say that fascist political movements in various parts of the world is growing in popularity, and no one should really be terribly surprised by that. When I began teaching this class in the early 2000s. The chapter on fascism was sort of this is more of a historical oddity, that was sort of the attitude of the chapter, of the text's authors, most people who wrote on ideology. Today, you can't say that fascism is sort of a fossil, if you will. It's no longer the case, and it's proof positive once again that ideas don't die. They can be discredited for a period of time, but a generation or two passes and people begin thinking those thoughts again. So certainly both Italy and Germany have legally outlawed the Fascist Party in Italy and the Nazi Party in Germany. Nevertheless, you had, in the early 2000s, Alessandra Mussolini, the granddaughter of Benito Mussolini, winning a seat in the Italian parliament. And in 2022, Giorgia Meloni, who is a conservative, and some would say, has some ties to Italian fascism, her party won control of the Italian parliament, and she is now the prime minister of Italy. That's a picture of her on this slide. To date, she has actually governed in the most pragmatic way that most kind of right-wing European figures have governed. She's been far less inclined to try and push Italy in an overtly authoritarian direction. More concerning, however, is the rise of neo-Nazi organizations and parties in Germany. The National Party of Germany, Nationaldemokratische Partei Deutschlands, under the previous label of Die Heimat, the homeland, has affiliations with the National Socialist Underground, which is a fascist organization that claimed responsibility for firebombing attacks and other assaults on Vietnamese and Turkish guest workers recently. Another far-right party, Alternative for Deutschland, which is the AfD, won 13% of the parliamentary vote in the 2017 elections and have moved further to the right since, with media reports alleging that the AfD leadership had clandestine meetings with neo-Nazis to discuss a master plan for the mass deportation of immigrants, including non-German citizens. Ahead of the 2025 snap elections in Germany, the American-South African tech entrepreneur Elon Musk, who was then serving in the Trump administration as the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, publicly endorsed the ADF and spoke virtually at an ADF rally where he urged Germans to move on from past guilt. Similarly, in February of 2025, Vice President J.D. Vance, who was in Europe for a security conference, met with the leaders of Germany's four major parties, including the ADF's leader, Alice Weidel. The ADF gained the most seats in the 2025 elections, but the conservative Christian Democrats under Friedrich Merz elected to form a coalition with the Social Democrats rather than allow the ADF into government, which is a policy that several European countries have adopted, following what we learned in the early chapters, to create a firewall between government and many of these far-right political parties. So what are some factors that give rise to fascism? One of the main ones, when you look both at Europe and at the United States, there has been this tendency towards a resurgent nationalism that is almost like a self-defense mechanism that has been provoked from two sources. One being the emergence of the European Union as a much stronger governing presence, but also by the flood of displaced refugees from Syria and Africa. Another factor that has exacerbated these tendencies are the COVID lockdowns during the COVID-19 crisis of 20 and 21. All these factors have tended to give rise to identity politics, which is going to be our subject for next week. I don't want to say anything more about it. We're going to start our discussion of that. But you also have a significant amount of misinformation, disinformation, and as a result, a proliferation of conspiracy theories pointing and positing that some unknown other, be it Jews or migrants or whatever, are somehow attacking French people and Italian people and threatening their identities. That's again something, to some extent, some of this, a great deal of it, is coming from Russia. They want to divide the United States. They want to divide Europe from the United States. They want the European Union to be destroyed. And they have sent enormous sums of money into both the United States and into Europe to fund far-right political organizing for the purpose of breaking up these coalitions. France has a fascist movement, the National Front. It's a neo-fascist party, again blaming immigrants for high unemployment, crime, and rising welfare costs. Jean-Marie Le Pen, who actually died in 2025, had multiple runs for the presidency. When I was in grad school, we talked a lot about the French far right, which in the late 1990s, not too many people were worried about them. Again, because the French have visceral recollections of fascism and they don't remember it well. They don't remember it kindly. And it was very easy for people to look at the National Front as a neo-fascist organization. Jean-Marie Le Pen's daughter, Marine Le Pen, has been far more pragmatic and frankly effective at forming alliances with other far-right European parties. She helped reform the country, or the party, as the National Rally. She stepped down from her leadership position of the National Rally in 2022 as a result of criminal charges placed against her. In March of 2025, she and several other members of the European Parliament were convicted of embezzlement. Le Pen was sentenced to 4 years in prison and was disqualified for running for public office for 5 years, which disqualifies her from the next scheduled French presidential election, which has to be held by 2027. So this raises the question, why do so many European far-right parties hate the EU? Most far-right Europeans oppose further integration. And they really fall into two different camps, with some calling for the breakup of the EU altogether, and others like Le Pen basically arguing for no further integration and for a much looser confederation. In no small part, Le Pen has really been quite active in packing the European Parliament with anti-EU candidates. And Le Pen was asked at one point about the fate of the EU, and she said, "I'm just waiting for one thing, which is that it break into pieces." The National Front has subsequently rebranded as the National Rally, but they have helped foment both, a deadlock, both in the European Parliament, but also within the French government. In June of 2024, Emmanuel Macron, who was the French president, gambled on snap elections, hoping that his centralist alliance would increase its majority in parliament. Instead, the elections produced no clear winner, with both far-left and far-right parties claiming victory. Macron installed a center-right minority party, which quickly lost a no-confidence vote over its proposed budget, which included sharp cuts to social programs that were widely unpopular. A second government, led by Sébastien Lecornu, resigned in early October, but was reappointed by Macron a week later. Lecornu narrowly survived votes of no confidence on October 16th of this month, gaining support of the Socialist Party by delaying deeply unpopular pension reforms. And so the French government has basically just stumbled on, while the European Parliament has largely been deadlocked by the fact that, again, many of these alt-right parties, these far-right nationalist parties, are just throwing monkey wrenches into the EU governing in any kind of meaningful way. And it's important to keep in mind that there are members of the European Union, like Romania and Hungary, that are increasingly moving back towards the kind of Russian influenced orbit. UKIP, the United Kingdom Independence Party in the United Kingdom, is both, again, anti-immigrant and anti-EU in its platform. UKIP has ties to far-right parties like Britain First, the British National Party, and the English Defence League. Reform UK has been a primary beneficiary of last year's Conservative losses in parliamentary elections that brought Labour into power for the first time in, God, it seems like more than 20 years. On this slide, you see Nigel Farage, who was a prominent leader of UKIP and a leader of the Brexit vote in 2016. Farage and his political movement have frequently been accused by domestic opponents of harboring fascist motivations. In his statements, Farage has rejected multiculturalism and advanced an extreme anti-migrant stance and called for mass deportations. Again, whether Farage is a fascist or a garden variety anti-immigrant authoritarian or anti-immigrant populist is yet to be determined, because frankly Farage has never been anything other than a backbencher in Parliament. And by that I mean someone who is not actually in government and has very little influence within within the halls of Parliament, if you will. Dutch right-wing parties in the Netherlands, kind of again emerged in 2002 with Pim Fortuyn, what was known as Fortuyn's List, kind of formed in 2002. Fortuyn's List almost certainly would have won control of government had not Fortuyn been assassinated. Subsequently, Geert Wilders, who is pictured on this slide, he of the very odd hairdo, basically organized the Party for Freedom, the PVV, around the idea of really extreme anti-Muslim rhetoric. In 2023, PVV won the most seats in the Netherlands House of Representatives, and this is largely due to their successful outreach to Dutch farmers. And that has, the success of people like Wilders and Nigel Farage have led some observers to say the primary threat to democracy in Europe is not Islamofascism, but plain old fascism. And again, this is a situation where the argument of many anti-immigrant folks is that, many of these Muslims are coming in, they're bringing Islamic, fundamentalist ideas that are alien to Europe. That is certainly a sentiment that is familiar to Americans, as we are dealing with the same kinds of issues. Anti-immigrant sentiments have frequently kind of erupted in violence. Again, the Syrian civil war, which is now just concluded, and in fact, Germany's the Christian conservatives are increasingly trying to encourage Syrian refugees to return to Syria, and there's a question of whether that will actually happen. You also have rising anti-Roma sentiment in Eastern Europe. If you don't know who the Roma are, they're commonly referred to as gypsies. These are folks who immigrated from India kind of a very long time ago. They have maintained their kind of pastoral cultural traditions. They move around quite frequently. And because they are not part of any kind of set community, and because occasionally they resort to kinds of petty crime, they are often the object of kind of othering, if you will. So you've had a rise of anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant parties in Scandinavian countries, and you actually had, I can't remember what year it was, but not too long ago, an avowed neo-Nazi, Anders Breivik, slaughtered 77 teenagers at an island summer camp to highlight his avowedly neo-Nazi and anti-Muslim beliefs. He was given the maximum prison sentence that he could be assigned in Norway. As I mentioned, Russia has a role, has played a role in the rise and intensification of far-right politics in Europe. European neo-Nazi and neo-fascist movements often express admiration for Putin. They believe that Putin is, sort of, a defender of white Christian identity. Russia has subsidized many of Europe's far-right parties. Several prominent far-right parties, including the Freedom Party of Austria, France's National Rally and Reconquête, and Germany's AFD, Italy's Lega Party, and the Netherlands Party for Freedom have all taken money from Russian entities, which is widely viewed as coming from Russian intelligence at the direction of Vladimir Putin. Russia has not confined its influence operations to Europe. Recently, it was exposed that the Russian government created a media corporation in Tennessee and funneled over $10 million to American conservative media influencers like Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, and Dave Rubin. Those influencers deny awareness that the money came from Russia and claimed that their views were not manipulated by the acceptance of that money. Nevertheless, they were towing a particular line that Vladimir Putin wants to be towed, which is, I hate elections. I don't believe in democracy. I hate both political parties. I think both political parties are feckless and ineffective. This is not me talking. This is people like Tim Pool talking. And again, this reflects the idea among many people on the right, both in Europe and the United States, that Russia is a white nation that is following the right policies, which include closed borders, mass deportations, and anti-LGBTQ laws. Another question is whether Saddam Hussein was a fascist, or in fact whether he was a Stalinist of some sort. To some extent, this is reflective of the questions about the Ba'ath Party and the pan-Arabist aspirations of the Ba'ath Party. Ba'athism emerged in Iraq, in Syria, to a lesser extent in Jordan, and to a greater extent in Egypt. And it reflected this idea of pan-Arabism, that there would be one Arab state. Jeez. Is everything okay? Okay, am I going to keep going? Okay. And again, this kind of broke apart in the 60s and 70s. Saddam Hussein came to power in the 1970s. His rise to power was occasioned by increasingly nationalistic, militaristic, and totalitarian, acts. His attempted invasion of Iran and his attempted invasion of Kuwait both reflect his territorial ambitions. The emphasis on nationalism is why radical Islamists tend to criticize Saddam Hussein. And again, the question of ISIS and whether ISIS was kind of an Islamo-fascist state. And again, the question there is, what were they really trying to do? They were trying to create some kind of theocracy. And that raises, again, the issue of, was it a theocracy? Was it a fascist regime? There are questions about, how those two tend to fit together. And now we're getting to the good stuff, fascism in America. There's a controversy over, again, the status of fascism. Because, from an American perspective, to name someone a fascist is to be making a value judgment. And so some scholars have argued that America has very deep roots in authoritarianism and fascism, while others claim that it was a relatively recent phenomenon. As a practical matter, overtly fascist movements are, kind of emerged in the late 1920s and early 1930s with the, kind of the America First movement. And there were folks that, like Charles Lindbergh, who expressed clearly anti-war and pro-Nazi sentiments in this period. And a number of fascists were kind of sympathetic to the Nazis, and the Nazis understood that and attempted to funnel money to those groups to, kind of encourage that kind of split within the United States. The reality is, of course, that Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, and Hitler's declaration of war on the United States shortly thereafter really ended the America First movement. But to speak briefly of Charles Lindbergh, in a 1941 speech in Des Moines, Iowa, that was titled "Who Are the Agitators?" Lindbergh condemned those Americans that he believed was pushing America into, entry into World War II, and he included capitalists, Anglophiles, intellectuals, and communists as pushing the United States into the war on the side of the British. Earlier, Lindbergh had argued, had given speeches basically saying that Germans have a greater sense of decency, and that their morality was far in advance of that of Americans. A viewpoint that, again, after 1941, was simply not acceptable. At the same time, America has deep roots, there are aspects of American culture that have deep roots in racism. And the title of this slide, Authoritarianism plus Racism equals Ku Klux Klan. The Klan was a vigilante paramilitary group originating in the states of the former Confederacy. There was generally a lack of leadership beyond the local chapter level. In part, the Klan's decentralized nature was a natural byproduct of the Southern cultural soil from which it sprang. The Klan was awfully loosely associated and directed by white citizens' councils, the local white kind of political elites that controlled state and local governments. While later iterations of the Klan had offices like Grand Dragons and Imperial Wizards, the people occupying those positions exerted relatively confined directional control over the individual chapters. The second Klan period from 1915 to 1944 really saw the leadership of the Klan in that era exert considerable influence over the Klan and over state politics to some extent. That period saw significant expansion of Klan presence outside the United States, particularly in agrarian states. Indiana, for example, had a Klan membership estimated at over 300,000, despite lower than average presence of minorities in Indiana. The Klan exerted considerable influence in Indiana politics, and the Grand Dragon of the Indiana Klan, D.C. Stephenson, famously once declared, "I am the law in Indiana." So that gives you a sense of the extent to which the Klan really was running things. And their ideology was, white supremacy and Christian fundamentalist, nativism, hatred of foreigners, and hatred of Jews. They routinely engaged in extrajudicial killings, lynchings, the planting of crosses as an intimidation tactic, and the suppression of voting rights of blacks, Catholics, and Jews in those states where they had influence. Another kind of common, contemporary manifestation of this kind of racism were the 2015 mass killings of black worshipers at Emmanuel Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Dylann Roof, pictured on this slide, was an avowed neo-fascist and white supremacist. He frequently claimed prior to the killings that blacks were taking over the world. Roof's announced motivation was to start a race war. But his actions were so heinous that even white supremacists who previously he had associated with disavowed him and said, killing innocent people in a church is way too extreme. He ultimately accepted life imprisonment without the possibility of parole to avoid the death penalty. Questions arose in 2016 over Trump's tendency to think about things in fascist ways. He approvingly posted on social media the Mussolini quote, "It is better to live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep." He refused to disown former Ku Klux Klan, Louisiana Ku Klux Klan Grand Dragon David Duke's endorsement, basically saying, "I don't know anything about David Duke." It's hard to imagine that he didn't. White supremacists were unsparing in their public admiration of Donald Trump in that period. And I think that had an effect on the surge of voting in certain parts of the United States where voting had been low, where turnout had been low, particularly in rural areas with large numbers of non-college educated whites. A number of militia groups have avowed neo-Nazi leanings. The claim is that the federal government is illegitimate and that D.C. is now being controlled by Zionists. The conviction that the federal government is going to take away their guns. The radicalization of some of these groups resulting from the Clinton administration's, the FBI and ATF's behavior in Ruby Ridge and the Waco Branch Davidian compound siege. Those events directly informed Timothy McVeigh's decision to bomb the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City in 1995. And again, this was a domestic. This was an example of domestic terrorism. Both of the Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh had been in the Army. They had both had avowedly racist, beliefs. They despised being in military units with blacks, and they were radicalized, upon leaving the Army with their association with certain militia groups. Many of these groups have been profoundly influenced by one book called The Turner Diaries. It was written by William Pierce under a pseudonym in 1978. He was founder of a neo-fascist group known as the National Alliance. The narrative takes the form of a series of diary entries of Earl Turner, who was a member of the organization that overthrows the Jewish-dominated system. And it talks about the old era where the system discriminated against white people. The discrimination of the system included gun control, affirmative action for minorities, encouraging non-white immigration and interracial marriage, and placing Jews, blacks, and other minorities in key leadership positions in schools, universities, the media, and federal law enforcement agencies like the FBI, the DEA, and the ATF. Opposing the system was the organization in this narrative, which are a group of right-wing and anti-liberal whites who have resisted brainwashing by the liberal media. In the narrative, one character, Catherine, rejects her liberal leanings after reading some books that helped her understand the unique historical role of the Jews as the ferment of decomposition of races and civilization. If you imagine that there are Hitlerian echoes in that passage, then you would not be mistaken. The organization robs Jewish businesses to buy weapons and use a fertilizer bomb to destroy the FBI's national headquarters. Again, this is fiction coming true in the Murrah building bombing. The Day of the Rope is described in the book as members of the organization publicly hanging hundreds of thousands of blacks and white race traitors from trees, lampposts, and highway overpasses as a warning, basically as an act of massive terrorism. The book unequivocally rejects constitutional democracy, calling for autocratic rule by a racially pure elite. The character in the book describes the American people voted themselves into the mess they're in now, arguing that Jews have taken over the country fair and square according to the Constitution, basically rejecting the Constitution. The Turner Diaries prophesied a great racial revolution in 1999, 110 years after the birth of the Great One, who would be Hitler. You also have, again, attempts by right-wing groups to engage in what might be called counter-programming. One alt-right or right-winger said, "We don't just entertain racist kids, we create them." There's a record company called Panzerfaust, which attempted to distribute 100,000 CDs of white power, skinhead rock to 13 to 19-year-old kids. Neo-fascist record labels like Hammerskins continue to have a significant footprint on social media today. There was a mass killing in Minneapolis at a synagogue where that person basically said that he had been influenced by the racist music that was produced by Hammerskins. So the question arises: does the United States have a militia problem? It would be true to say that a lot of Nazis are parts of militias, but that not all militias are Nazis in sympathy. So while neo-Nazi activity on social media has increased, not all militia groups espouse Nazi ideology. Many of them are survivalists. They're radical individualists. They're people who are paranoid about the influence of the federal government. There has been a tendency that has been well established and tracked for the number of militia groups to spike whenever Democrats win the presidency. This really goes back to the Clinton administration, but it really skyrocketed during the Obama administration. Imagine this: that a black person won the presidency, caused many Americans' heads to explode. Many militia groups, again, fear the federal government's concentrated authority and simply want to be governed at the state level to a greater extent. And many of them are simply Second Amendment, extremists. They believe they have a God-given right to, haul their AR-15s into a fast food joint and stuff themselves with Big Macs, while everybody else looks on, terrified. But that is the nature of their belief. Let's talk a little bit about the alt-right, which is really kind of an attempt to mainstream what might be euphemistically described as racial conservatism. The white identity movement really emerges with Richard Spencer's work. This is a rejection of establishment, conservative, mainstream. Alt-right originates with Richard Spencer, he has espoused anti-Semitic white supremacists in a variety of conspiracy theories over the course of his rise to semi-prominence. They condemn political correctness that they believe are enforced by liberal media and higher education. They characterize non-whites as lazy, shiftless, and irresponsible. And again, the question arises, is alt-right merely rebranded neo-Nazism or neo-fascism? I leave that to you. Alt-right media, increasingly you have ideas that are being circulated by social media sites like InfoWars and Breitbart News. Pictured on this slide is Steve Bannon, who was, it was interesting. I've made the argument that I believe that at the 2024 or 2025 inauguration of Donald Trump, that Elon Musk gave a Nazi salute. He put his arm across his chest and he stuck his hand out just like that. And then he turned around and did it to the other side of the crowd. That looked to me like pretty much a Nazi salute. Now, Bannon at CPAC did this, and if you still frame it, then it looks like a Nazi salute. The reality is he being an American, I think he understood the danger of what he was doing, but he has a problem with Elon Musk, and he wanted to appeal to those same people. He kind of did one of these. He did it and it was very abbreviated. Okay, Elon Musk held it was up high and he held it. Bannon kind of, is it really? And so there's a question about whether that was a Sieg Heil kind of Nazi salute. Several, conspiracy theories have been disseminated on alt-right social media. Those sites, again, are very attractive to Americans who are fearful, who feel marginalized, and who feel threatened by wokeism, whatever that means. And again, the virtue of that term, wokeism, is that you can pack so many things into it and you don't have to really explain yourself. QAnon is one of the more prominent conspiracy theories. Again, it originated on alt-right friendly message boards, 4chan and 8chan. The argument was that there's a highly placed anonymous U.S. Government official by the name of Q who posts drops on these social media sites describing the inner workings of the deep state. The argument is that QAnon is revealing a large network of liberal, Satan-worshiping, cannibalistic pedophiles who run an international child sex trafficking operation from nondescript locations like pizza parlors and places like that. The conspiracy of QAnon posits Donald Trump as leading a righteous crusade to purge the deep state and drain the swamp of these liberal, cannibalistic pedophiles who worship Satan. Ironically, the one child trafficking, pedophile that we know about is Epstein. That guy was close friends with Donald Trump. So, it's just kind of odd. Nevertheless, QAnon beliefs have sunk pretty deep. A 2021 survey found that 16% of Americans continue to believe core tenets of the QAnon conspiracy. That translates into upwards of 40 million Americans. Roughly 1/4 of Republicans found QAnon credible. 70% of QAnon adherents tend to believe the 2020 election was fraudulent. And so Americans who believe in QAnon conspiracies share a common belief that there is a pervasive cultural threat to their vision of America as a white Christian nation. Now, again, in the first Trump term, you had the Unite the Right rally, which was an attempt to unify various alt-right factions around the opposition to the removal of Confederate monuments. The night before this rally, there was a torchlight march through Charlottesville with ralliers chanting, "Jews will not replace us." There were large counter-protests led by Antifa groups. One alt-right militant rammed his car into a crowd of counter-protesters, killing one and injuring dozens. And Trump's response to that was, again, typically muted. Basically trying to say there were very good people on both sides. When one group of people is walking around with Confederate flags and placards, saying Jews will not replace us, it's hard for some people to say, well, yeah, okay, I guess those could be good people. So now we're going to look at sort of an actual primary text of one of these alt-right groups. This is the Patriot Front Manifesto. These were former members of the neo-Nazi group Vanguard America, which split away from the group and relabeled themselves Patriot Front. They issued a manifesto, which is basically a statement of beliefs and goals. Pictured on this slide is Thomas Ryan Rousseau, who was a native Texan who founded Patriot Front in 2017, following the universally negative reaction to the Unite the Right rally. Rousseau is notable as being one of the only members of Patriot Front to have disclosed his name. In fact, he basically forbids members from disclosing their name. He argues that America is at a crossroads. Democracy has failed this once great nation. To be an American is to be a descendant of conquerors, pioneers, visionaries, and explorers. Our mission is a hard reset on the nation as we see today, on the nation we see today. America's national way of life faces annihilation, and politics played a large part in destroying this nation, and it will not be politics that will save us. Think about that. He's basically saying democracy doesn't work, elections don't work, politics doesn't work. Well, if elections and politics don't work, what is left? What are your options other than violence? He's calling for a new American nation state, the problem of misinformation regarding the essence of American identity from this Mr. Rousseau person. The debasement of our history and the visions of our founders has been both treasonous and prevalent. There again, he's fostering this sense of grievance that white people and how we're being portrayed in history is being slandered. The American nation is and always has been the American people, their culture, and their impact on the land and the world they inhabit. Does that not just resonate with the stuff that Hitler and the other fascists were writing about, the way, kind of the word salad that, kind of binds everything up in this sense of blood, soil, and a particular racial group. The interest of our nation's cause is the interest of the American nation and thus the American people. Again, it's tautological and silly, but what do you expect from a 20-something that, basically has just steeped himself in fascist literature? Collective liberty is the freedom of our people, must share from the forces which seek nothing less than our binding and unconditional submission. What he's basically saying is we must tear ourselves away from all these other folks who are attempting to force us to submit to liberal or socialist rule. Who is an American according to Patriot Front? Membership within the American nation is inherited through blood, not ink. Even those born in America may yet be foreign, according to Mr. Rousseau. The American identity was created in the struggle to conquer the continent. The American state is headed toward what most see as the horizon, but the few of us who know better know to be the edge of a precipitous cliff. The hard truth of the coming struggle is that the American as we know it, is that America as we know it is already dead or will not survive. Again, what does it mean to be an American to him? It means nothing, right? America is dead, long live America. America is a bleeding carcass, bereft of the moral foundations which made it powerful. Nothing about the current system is sustainable. And he talks a lot about sort of, how consumerism is destroying us. There's some, you can think about those things. The lives of the average American will change because of the great national upheaval. Well, if he gets his way, it's going to be more than an upheaval. I'm guessing that only people who are racially pure like him are somehow going to, or who think like him, are going to survive. And that ain't many folks. He will be removed from the decadence and given community. So in exchange for the amenities of modernity, you get your fellow racists living in comity. Identity, the individual and the collective. Individualism, while originally good in concept and proposition, has been allowed to run rampant. Internationalization, which is another word for kind of globalization, has weakened people's connection to community. Again, you could see a point to that. But where he takes this stuff is another question altogether. To see yourself solely as an individual is misguided and lacks an ethical basis, says the guy that's spewing this stuff. A debased civilization seeks to maximize individuals' personal pleasure. We have to recover our tradition, and our tradition is revolution, and our land is where tyrants come to die. This is how he kind of closes his little screed. So back to the alt-right, a large American audience. You can estimate, it's in the millions. A large audience has been receptive to claims that waves of immigration are deliberate attempts to replace white majority populations with more pliable immigrants. If you look at this slide, it's a guy named Renaud Camus, who in 2010 conceived, he's a French novelist and conspiracy theorist, who conceived of the idea that a global elite is plotting to replace the white populations of Europe and the United States with non-European immigrants. And his work has been widely translated and adopted by a number of neo-fascists in Europe and the United States. America has a long history of anti-migrant paranoia. Non-white immigration has long tended to provoke nativist backlashes going all the way back to the middle of the 19th century. When you first saw your large waves of non-English speaking, non-white immigrants, the Chinese coming in from the West Coast and large numbers of Southern Europeans coming in and Eastern Europeans coming in from the East Coast. In point of fact, the first immigration law in the United States passed in 1882 was the Chinese Exclusion Act. Ask yourself what that law was intended to achieve. In fact, it was a situation where and this became a national issue because of local politics. There was a shoe strike on the East Coast, and shoe manufacturers brought in Chinese cobblers from the West Coast to break the strike. And that infuriated large numbers of white Americans on the East Coast. It nationalized, got into the national media. Even in the 19th century, there were kind of national newspapers. And you ended up with, the first time we drafted immigration laws, and you get, white supremacists, you're kind of influencing the drafting of those laws. And it basically was like, no more of these, migrants. And so alt-right replacement theory has been amplified by conservative media figures like Tucker Carlson. Carlson has had a long media career. He actually started his career working for PBS. He then worked for a period of time for CNN. He was on Crossfire. He was on that show when Jon Stewart basically got it canceled, saying that they were, that the show was hurting America. He then actually briefly did a stint on MSNBC, back when MSNBC was still trying to be kind of a nonpartisan network. He then joined Fox News, and from 2016 to 2023, he occupied the primetime slot, like 8 to 9 o'clock, for Fox News, where, again, on several occasions, he openly promoted the Great Replacement theory. He's no longer on Fox because following, the coverage of the 2020 presidential election, he and several other Fox News and Newsmax, hosts accused Dominion voting systems of manipulating the outcome of the election. There was a libel trial. His emails and texts were brought out as evidence that these folks knew what they were saying wasn't true about Dominion, and ultimately they did it anyway because it made for good viewing, because they literally couldn't not spew that stuff to their audience. They were losing audience share when they tried to say, when Fox News or Newsmax people would try to say what they thought was more likely the case. And so, Fox News ended up losing a $787 million. They basically settled the case for $750 million rather than go to judgment because they knew they were going to lose. Okay? And as a result, Tucker Carlson got fired, and now he's basically just kind of a free agent. I guess he does like a Substack thing, or he's got his own little social media platform, and so that that's really how things are going today for Tucker Carlson. But he's still fairly influential. So, can fascism happen in the United States? There have been fictionalized accounts of how fascism could occur in the United States. If you're interested, Sinclair Lewis in 1935 wrote a book called It Can't Happen Here. Philip Roth's book, The Plot Against America, in 2004, is kind of a historical fiction, imagining what would have happened if Charles Lindbergh had actually won election in 1940. Donald Trump's rise has sparked concerns across the ideological spectrum. There have been a number of Republicans who have raised concerns about Donald Trump and his ideological leanings. One of his chiefs of staff, former Marine Corps General John Kelly, has basically said, if you look at the definition of fascism, extreme nationalism, authoritarianism, wanting to centralize all power unto himself, racism, ticks it off, basically says he fits the garden variety definition. Another chief of staff, John Bolton, again, a very conservative Republican, has basically dismissively and derisively said that he didn't think that Donald Trump was smart enough to have formed a coherent ideology, that he is all impulse and narcissism. So what is the evidence that Donald Trump, could harbor fascist beliefs? Certainly he has from the very start. He talked about knocking the hell out of protesters at his rallies. He advocated violence and setting aside the Constitution in the aftermath of the 2020 elections. He has clearly cultivated a cult of personality. Pictures of him with a crown on his head, pictures of him, he's like some big muscle guy. That stuff is churned out for a reason. It is mythologizing, the person of Donald Trump. He has certainly attempted to centralize power under his personal control. He's basically cut, Congress out of the governing process wherever he could. Emblematic of that is his recent demolition of the entire East Wing of the White House. Now, people are I've heard some conservatives try to say, well, he's using private money, so he doesn't need, approval. Well, the White House is a historical building. It's a monument. If you are against removing Confederate monuments because you think it's a historical monument, the East Wing of removing a wing of the White House is equally problematical. And in fact, he said he wasn't going to touch the building itself. He was going to build it next to it. And then he just went ahead and tore it up. Trump has sotto voce, which is an Italian word for soft voice, cultivated his relationship with militias and gangs like the Three Percenters, like the Patriots, and various other groups. In both of his terms, he's advocated the territorial expansion of the United States. He has said he wants to annex Canada. He has said he wants to seize control of the Panama Canal. He has said he wants to seize Greenland. He wants to take Greenland from Denmark. Again, saying it and doing it are two different things. But he has certainly said it. He has certainly announced he wants to do it. He's used slogans like America First that are, they're cribbed directly from the fascist movement, the American movement of the 1930s, led by Charles Lindbergh. He has worked to undermine the credibility of news media and other institutions that could hold him to account, that could basically point out when he's not being truthful. He declares anything that he doesn't agree with fake news. Trump has created his own alternative reality based on alternative facts from the very start when he said, I had the largest inauguration crowd in history. And when people showed pictures, he basically had his press secretary go out and say, this was the largest inauguration crowd in history. His repeated attempts to memory hole his role in the January 6th Capitol riots is an example of this. Sixth, he's repeatedly declared undocumented immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country. That is direct language pulled from Hitler. He has stated in recent, at a funeral for Charlie Kirk, for the guy that was assassinated, he stated that he hates his domestic opponent. He calls them the enemy within. He has created an enemies list and has sought to prosecute people that have opposed him in the past, including New York Attorney General Letitia James, including former FBI Director Jim Comey. Now, I'm not going to tell you that Donald Trump is a fascist. The evidence is for you to look at. I have watched people, look at Donald Trump with a highly selective, frame of reference. But both my grandparents served in World War II. And they were fighting fascists. So, conclusion, fascism as an ideology. Let's look at it from the perspective of the four functions that we talk about, right? How do fascists explain the world? They oftentimes resort to conspiracy theories. They oftentimes employ scapegoats to conjure up a world controlled by villains, be it Jews, liberals, socialists, minorities, whatever. In that sense, fascism tends to be an innately populist movement. Evaluation, it revolves around the question of how strong and unified are the people of identity idealized by a particular fascistic ideology. But nation tends to, predominate their thinking. Orientation. We should never think of ourselves as individuals. We should only take our meaning and our value from the state and the value that the state places upon us. The individual isolated from the state, according to fascist thought, is a nullity. What do fascists, what do they want to do? Or more importantly, what do they want you to do? They want you to believe, to obey, and to fight. To the extent that you are free, it is only the freedom that the state grants you from a fascistic perspective. How does fascism address the democratic ideal of all stripes? Fascists express their contempt for democracy. To the extent that fascists of any stripe accept democratic principles, it's a highly exclusionary variant of Herrenvolk, the master race's freedom. Right? That from a fascist perspective, other fascists deserve recognition and dignity. Everyone else deserves nothing. And it's important to consider the role that propaganda, starting with radio, film, television, and now social media, plays in undermining support for democracy from a fascist perspective. I am so glad we are done with fascism. I hope never to speak of it again. But unfortunately, I'm afraid we will be talking about it a lot, whether we like it or not. For next week, we're going to move on to another controversial topic, and that is the idea of liberation ideologies, and of the politics of identity. Now, we'll be stepping into some controversial areas. I will spend some time in my first presentation making sure that no one in the audience misapprehends what I am trying to do. I am trying to get you to understand the role that identity plays in politics today. I am not trying to tell you that you should feel any particular way about how identity ideologies present themselves. I'll see you next time.